pretty sunset tonight.
In that very difficult period of time, shortly after World War II ended, the whole world was beginning to rebuild, and our country was still doing some practice with the heavy bombers, some training, and so that's why we're here. One of these heavy bombers crashed.
I'm Chuck.
From where?
Boise.
Okay. And
We're set to go.
I'm
Stephanie from Garden Valley.
Okay. And
Ich bin Kurt aus Bayern, Ruhpolding. Wir gehen für eine Expedition.
Ich bin Margot, auch aus Ruppolding, und ich gehe auch auf die Expedition.
So right now we're down at the hot spring, at the Bog Hot Spring, and we're going far away up into these mountains. So they are behind the front mountain. There's another mountain range, and that's where the bomber wreck will be. So we have to go all the way down there with the four-wheelers, cross, and then come back in between the mountains and go all the way, maybe 20 miles, one way.
okay. And what kind of a wreck is it then?
It's a B-24 bomber, a 4-engine bomber, which had a really fairly big engines in it. And there's still 4 engines up there, the landing gears, and some turbocharging parts. No fuselage anymore, a few metal pieces. That's it. We will see later.
Okay, good. Getting ready?
I'm all ready.
Okay, we're ready then, huh?
After numerous tries to find this bomber wreck, which so tragically wrecked on the treeless Denio Peak, treeless Pueblo Mountains in 1945, it looks like we may be going to get on our way this time. We have Kurt and Chuck along, and they both know where it is, so we'll find it. The road is very rough, but with our little Honda four-wheelers, we'll be able to negotiate the roughest road through sagebrush country. We're all anxious to go see the wreck. This is a very historical spot on top of the mountain. The little desert road winds us uphill and downhill through gullies and washes, and then eventually into the Pueblo Mountains. It's a long, rough road up here, but every turn of the wheel gets us a little closer to our destination. And then through some spectacular rock formation as the landscape changes in front of our very eyes. We are in Nevada yet, but soon we'll be in Oregon. This bomber wrecked just inside Oregon on the Oregon-Nevada border. Through more gullies and washes as we push on. There's plenty of time to reflect on the war and seeing those old fleets of bombers go over, but I'm the only one that's old enough to have any memory of it. My memories are more of the Japanese involvement in the war, since I was only 5 years old when this bomber crashed. We're now entering the treeless Pueblo Mountains, and we're trying to figure out which peak this airplane crashed on. This airplane wreck isn't easy to find, there are no real good directions or maps to it, and most people try 2 and 3 times before they ever locate it, just by trying all these desert roads out in this range country. And of course, since it's cattle grazing country, we'll come to gates where we have to open and close.
I think maybe just coming into view.
Propeller flap?
Yeah, I think it is.
I think there where the road is. That's
Ja,
propeller
that
flap. And the saddle-like thing,
That's the place.
I think that's the place.
That's right.
Kurt and Chuck both agree we can see the very mountain ahead of us where this heavy bomber crashed that cold, dark night in 1945. Then we reach Propeller Flats. Some think that one of the propellers on the big heavy bomber got discharged or ripped off and flew down in this flat. But somebody's probably taken the propeller, if that's the reason this flat got its name, because we saw no sign of the big propeller that slices through the air, carrying that airplane on its missions. Now that we start up Denio Peak, the road becomes much steeper and much more rocky and rough as can be. No one's even having second thoughts about not going. We're on a mission and we're going to find that bomber wreck, and there's no other answer. That's what we're going to do as we climb steep mountain trails and go through beds of rock and sagebrush till no end and not a tree in sight. There's some super nice rock formations as we climb the little 2-track road up to where we'll see the bomber. And fortunately we have Kurt along. Kurt is from Germany, but he has studied airplanes and goes to air shows, so he knows about planes from both sides of the war. So hopefully he'll be able to tell us something about it as we finally reach the top of where we're going and we start seeing wreckage directly ahead of us. Chuck arrives at the site first, then Marge and I and Kurt and Margot bring up the rear as we reach the crash site. This is a very powerful sight, knowing that 11 men perished in the blink of a cat's eye at this spot in the cold winter months of 1945. What a totally awesome sight, just under the summit of Denio Peak, under the cliffs just about to the top of the mountain. We start seeing some of the motors laying there as we pull up.
Whenever you are.
Okay, am 9. Februar 1945 ist an dem Platz B-24D abgestürzt und 11 Mann an Bord sind alle ums Leben gekommen und es sind 1990 sind die Reste dann zusammengesammelt worden und dann beerdigt worden.
Okay. One of the engines, and it burned with impact, I guess. Melted a bunch of aluminum. Wow. Nice big pistons.
I bet it doesn't have very many hours on that engine, you know that.
I bet not. this is the pistons themselves right there.
When you see further on the brake pads, also the engine, they're brand new. They I don't know how many hours they ran, you know.
I'll bet there's very little hours on it.
Yeah.
And the good quality. I guess that's aluminum, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
The 2 rows engine.
Oh.
They had about 1,200 horsepower each.
Oh. Each
12 or 1,500
horsepower.
horsepower.
Yeah. And that's twice what the B-17 had, you say, huh?
Almost, yeah.
And there's 2 rows of pistons.
2 rows, and the P-17 had only 1 row.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's like 2 radial engines smashed together. So they got one row here, another row here.
Boy, the aluminum melted on
The
this.
bigger one, the B-29, they had 4 rows.
Oh, really?
But they had problems with the cooling for the later ones.
I'll bet. Yeah, time the air got back there,
They
it was
got
already.
a lot of heat.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a serial number. It might be a part now.
Oh, yeah.
The
Spark plug.
Spark plug, yeah.
Spark plug wire.
Boy, it hit with a thump, I'll bet.
This is something from the oxygen system they had. You know, they had the oxygen on there. That was a kind of distributor, or like a lowering the pressure regulator.
Yeah, for their oxygen.
Yep.
Well, probably the
So
oxygen.
every airman was hooked with the oxygen mask. They had throughout the whole plane. They did those oxygen sensors or
Yeah,
regulators.
yeah.
And so they had a few spare masks. So one guy told me he had a cold, and he was using 7 of them because they froze up on them
Oh,
because high altitude and the air. Get it off?
And there's a telephone there.
oh, it's just a telephone.
Some
Electronic thing.
electronic.
That's something that goes around the engine?
No, that's an engine mount.
Oh, yeah. What do you think happened to the plane to cause it to crash?
I think they banked the plane in an angle which didn't got enough uplift and then crashed in.
Oh, and they were,
Very young airman.
oh, yeah. Young and maybe sort of unexperienced. Yeah. But they went in,
hours on the planes.
and they went in full with full power on.
I believe so.
Yeah. That's some of the fuselage, huh? Are there any seats here or anything?
Haven't seen any.
So on August 31st, the last people were here.
So that's,
Oh, Becky. Oh, this is the turbocharger.
that's where the exhaust
There
goes
was,
through.
yeah. Oh, and there was a turbocharger for each engine
For
there?
each engine, yeah. It was on the wings,
Oh, yeah.
below the wing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's the fan light. And
It was the fan which the exhaust went. So all the exhaust went out this way,
uh-huh.
and the air coming in was on the other side.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
another sample. You see the other.
There's a large piece of steel laying here that was the armor for the belly of the plane, and that was to keep a bullet from tearing through the fuselage and killing or injuring someone. The struts still are laying here with the wheels still on, although the tires burned off in the fire as it crashed. Kurt looks around, and he's actually figured out which direction the airplane came in by the places where we find the wreckage. This airplane hit the mountain at full throttle, and it actually buried the front part of the fuselage right into the cliffs of Denio Peak.
she saw 2 puffs or something. Now this is another engine.
Yep.
We examined each engine as it was laying here right under the cliffs of Denio Peak, and what huge engines, and they all had burned some but not a great lot. We haven't forgot that this very spot where we're standing, 11 men lost their lives when this powerful bomber plowed into Denio Peak, and they probably died instantly.
To cover.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And this is more engine mount stuff.
I think there were some rubber in between holding the engine while rattling.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
These are the skies between engine and structure.
Yeah. And
The wreckage really wasn't scattered out over a real broad area like one might expect. It was all pretty much confined to one little row of wreckage here on top of the mountain.
material. Oh yeah, here's some more. Where do you think the point of impact that the plane hit then would be? Right here?
Probably.
And maybe,
You know, the engines here, landing gear here, landing gear there. I think that was the front landing gear.
oh yeah. And do you think they,
They came from this direction and tried to go over there.
which direction do you say they came from? From that way?
They came from California
Yeah.
south, and they went home to mountain home, Idaho, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, and so,
See, there's an engine. There's the middle landing gear. There's a side landing gear, so it means probably going in this way.
yeah.
Hard to tell because you don't move the engines pretty far.
Yeah.
It's the front
This is the
landing.
front landing gear then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this engine is right there. Yeah, another burned up turbocharger.
This is still in a good shape.
Yeah.
And let's see. See, that's the side they pumped air back into the carburetors.
Oh yeah.
Pressing.
Yeah.
They were using the exhaust, spinning the wheel, and then
Yeah.
pressing.
Oh, the exhaust in the wheel. Yeah. And then. Oh, here's another landing gear.
Yeah, that's the side.
The other side.
The other side of the brake pads, fairly new.
Oh, be darned.
So you see the landing gear, see the wingspan of the plane, the landing gear here,
Yeah.
big one, the landing gear here, at the front here. So
Yeah.
must have come in this way.
Right. Yeah. And went right into here. Yeah, there's the brake pads.
I wonder there are no fuel tanks left.
Did they have the rubber fuel tanks?
Yeah.
Oh, they probably burned up, didn't
This
they?
is the self-sealing.
Be a good day for rattlesnakes to be out.
Yeah.
There's the brake pads. Oh, and the drum. Looks like the drum broke in half. Boy, it must have burned pretty good right in this spot.
Yep.
Look at all the melted stuff.
Yeah.
Well, probably a fuel tank landed here and exploded. Another turbocharger, and then there's one more engine someplace now.
Ja. So 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah. Not a massively big one, is it?
No,
Yeah.
I think they were putting out 24 volts.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh, yeah. To run some equipment or something. Windshield wiper motor. Yeah. Some of the frames.
In this area, we see some of the frame structure. When it hit, it just buried that frame structure right into the rocks of the mountain. The wreckage isn't really scattered out over a real big area, and I guess that's because it hit that mountain head on, and so part of it just buried and the rest of it just kind of didn't go far.
I think the bodies ended up right in here, and in the 90s they dug and found more human remains. At the time of the crash, it was winter, and probably things were covered with snow, and it was cold and windy up here, and so they didn't find all the broken body parts until in the 90s they found more by sifting the soil. What?
There's a total spectacular view of the tops of the Pueblo Mountains from up on top Denio Peak. At about 7,500 feet above sea level.
You want some more, Tom?
While we're up here, we'll take a real quick trip over to Denio Creek where we can look over the valley below. And here is an old gold and silver mine on top of a mountain. The old house is still standing where the men lived, and like all the old mining shacks, it had an old oil stove in it, but this one was pretty good. It even had a butane cook stove, an oil heating stove, and then we went to a little shed down below where they had some equipment, some homemade equipment for sorting the gold out from the rocks.
That's a horsehide belt, and what kind of motor ran that then, Chuck? It's not there, huh? No. And then there's the bin.
Yeah.
Oh, everything around the mine.
Differential of a car.
Everything around the mine
Old
is.
Chevy that had the enclosed drive line.
Oh yeah.
It had the tube, this didn't turn. The shaft inside did.
Yeah. That's a powder box.
Mm-hmm.
Side of a powder box.
Before we leave Bog Hot, I'm going to take a trip up and look at where the source is. The source is where numerous springs come right out of the flat desert, and they're hot as can be, and then they combine and flow down for quite a little ways down a ditch and eventually end up in a pond where the water is used for irrigation. This water is too hot to use up here at the source. This theme rises from the hot springs as the sun sets closer and closer to the horizon. I'm at the source now, and there are just numerous springs come right out of the ground right in this one area, and then they all combine to make this really big hot Springs Creek. Last night after dark, we were walking around in our bare feet but I guess we should have known better than that. There's a little scorpion here, and he was out last night. We saw him last night. He probably wouldn't have minded stinging one of us. We stopped at Denio Junction to get us a little ice and a little bit of water before we move on out to our next desert location. This town probably wasn't even here at the time of the crash because Highway 140 had yet to be built. So it would have been just a dirt road into Denio. There's some interesting sculptures around Denio Junction, and Denio is on up the road just a little ways farther. The road is now paved through Denio, and the old town sets just ahead of us in the trees, and up on top of the mountain, only 2.5 miles from town, the way a crow would fly, is where this bomber wreck is, but it's a steep mountain to have to climb. We say goodbye to Nevada, and we're into Oregon right at Denio. Then we go to Whitehorse Hot Springs, and we no more than arrive there, and a good brisk thunder shower comes in, complete with plenty of hail. It was pretty noisy for a little while, but it only lasted a short period of time, and then, like usual, the sun came out, and it was a very nice day once again. We had water running freely all around the little place where we camped at Whitehorse Hot Springs, and then this water all ran into some mud holes, which don't seem to sink into the ground. They just have to evaporate. After the rain and lightning, thunder, and hailstorm was over, there were a few water puddles around, but the weather turned off really nice, so we could go on about our having a good time. It seemed as though the beaver weren't bothered much by that. Being a water animal, I guess they enjoyed it. So they went ahead about doing their beaver things, like cruising around trying to find some tender willows to eat and to pack in for winter. They'll cut these willows off, eat all the vegetation off from them, and bury them down in the bottom of their pond, and then that's a refrigerator where they can get them out in the winter, and they can go just under the ice and go down the bottom of the pond and get them and eat them in the winter. That way they don't have to go out in the ice and snow and take a chance on being eaten by a predator. The beaver are our largest rodent, and they have really large teeth, which they need to use all the time because they're growing all the time, and they need to keep them worn down or they get so long they can't use them. But it takes a beaver just a matter of seconds to cut a willow, and then he drags it across the pond as he is doing here, takes it over to the beaver house and sinks it down. And I suppose they prepare it for winter. At that point, they take it down and bury it under the mud so it doesn't float away, and then that works as a really nice refrigerator. They work usually at night, but since beaver skin aren't worth a whole lot, they haven't been hunted or trapped much in the past few years, and the beaver are just, the population is really increasing, and so there are beaver ponds and beaver dams all up and down Willow Creek. It's just a series of beaver dams. He's pulled it around to where he can put it in the beaver house, and we have an excellent spot where we can climb up on a rock and watch these beaver as they do their little beaver things. And the beaver house is on that sort of a little island. The cattails have grown up enough you can only barely see it, but there's constant activity there. That last light of an evening is the time we usually see them. Around the 1820, beaver hats were in. They'd take the fur from the beaver and make a real fancy felt hat that sold for a lot of money. It would be like a couple months' work for a person to buy one, or maybe even more. But now, since they're all the synthetics, the beaver's pelts aren't really worth skinning the beaver. So they're making this scene all up and down all the little creeks and things in the west. They're big beaver and little beaver. And sometimes we'll see two beavers swimming side by side. I think these are probably the juvenile beaver, and we even at one case saw a little bit of a beaver fight. There seems to be plenty to eat for these beaver around the pond, and they've backed up the water so the brush and everything is growing really good around there. Plus it provides a lot of habitat for all sorts of other creatures, fish included, ducks, and all sorts of little birds that like the swamp, like the red-winged blackbirds. The beaver dive really good, and there were some young ones that whenever we'd talk, they'd hear us talking, and so they would dive, and they'd be down a little while, and then pretty soon they'd come up and we'd see them make a beeline for the beaver house. The next morning, we're ready to continue on our adventures, and so we're going to head out and try to find some sunstones today. We'll get the Hondas going and head out. Chuck's brought 2 Honda 4-wheelers with him, so Kurt and Margot from Germany will have one to ride as well. We've packed plenty of drinking water and our lunch, 'cause all these trips take us a full day, and we're going out in the desert a long, long ways, and so we'll be all day on all our adventures. But this is a really nice way to travel in the desert. We can go quite a bit faster than we can in a vehicle, and also in places where we couldn't get a vehicle. After bumping over some really rough roads, we come to a pit where people have been digging sunstones. Someone's left a screen there, and we were going to try it and see how it worked. It didn't really work all that good. We found that it was probably better just to pick them up off the surface of the ground, but we did find some on the screen as well.
There's a good one right there. See it?
There's one right there. There's one right there.
Yeah.
Look at that one there.
Can you hold it in your hand, Stephanie? Yeah. Nice one.
The sunstone have become quite popular in recent years. They were not too popular a few years back, but there's one very aggressive mine called the Dust Devil where they're really promoting them, and so we've got connections overseas, so we send them overseas and have them faceted, and they're called the Oregon Diamond or the Oregon Sunstone, and they make really nice necklaces or rings or whatever you'd like to make of them. Kurt's found most of his just on the surface, and he has some really nice ones as well. There's some bigger ones and some smaller ones. There is a little bit of variation in the color, and Marge usually always just finds hers on the surface. Since that big rain it's washed the dirt off from them and they're easily found. After the sunstones, we went to an area where there are big agates just laying on the surface of the ground. Then, of course, we had to stop at the Pony Express station and take a look at it. This is a very historical spot, and all that's left are just a little bit of the ruins, but it was a double wall stone building with mud for mortar and mud in between the two walls. We take a look at the ruins and imagine what it was like to be one of these Pony Express riders. You had to be a really good rider and ride fast. We made a whole day of finding sunstones out at the first, it's called the Denio Sunstone area, and it's 50 miles out of Denio. So the next day we go out to the Borax Lake Sunstone area, which is a few miles out of Borax Lake, and there's supposed to be a different color sunstones. So we're going to look and see what we can find, and we're finding some really nice ones real easy out here because it's a very remote area and not many people get there. So we're finding some really nice colored. They're different colored than the ones at the Denio Sunstone area. So we're finding a good batch of nice sized, really nice colored ones. And in sunstone, it seems like the colors are the most desirable thing. The clears aren't worth as much as the colored, but we're not selling any of them anyway. We need all we can find, and some of the better ones we'll select and send them overseas to be faceted. We find them in rocks, in the dirt, and just laying on the surface. And even an anthill, the ants that build the gravel anthills, they've selected some of the tiny sunstones to decorate their anthill. Now we're heading back to camp. So we've been out here most of the day again. It seems like we only have time for one trip per day. We go back to camp and everyone kind of contributes a little bit of food, and we'll have us a really nice potluck dinner. Still plenty of water puddles setting around, but anyway, the fire danger isn't as bad now, and so we'll go back to the hot springs, and then we can wash off a little bit of that dust that we got all over us out in the desert. Still a few puddles of water setting around our camp, and they're beginning to look kind of funky, but at least they have a good reflection. And this water just doesn't percolate down through the dirt here because it's mostly a clay mixture, so it more or less has to evaporate.
Very bumpy.
Before you shut it off, you want to go back?
Oh. It's enough for today.
That's enough.
We were riding along country road.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of dust on you.
Well, let's see.
Well, how was your ride?
Good.
Nice and smooth?
It was damn rough.
Before you shut off, do you want to go back?
No.
Did you get any dust on you?
Just 60 miles of dust.
Yeah. We got plenty of dust on us, but anyway, it's the hot springs takes care of that dust really well. And so the next morning, we're up and at it, and everyone's ready to go on another adventure. This time, we're going to go out to Coyote Lake and see if we can find some of the survey monuments for my daughter's property out on the edge of Coyote Lake. We stopped along the old military road. The old military road went through this area and ended up at about Whitehorse Ranch and then went on, and it went all through the desert country, and it was mainly used for Indian fighting. since Oregon had Indian troubles really later than most every other state, they had these roads where they'd patrol, and they had wagons with cannons in them. And over not too far from here, on the Owyhee River, they were going down a real steep road, and one of the cannons rolled out of the back of the wagon, and it's supposedly still in the bottom of the Owyhee River, if that information is
Wild
correct.
horse has been here and rolled. Look at his big old tracks. A lot of them have developed.
I just said to Kurt, that's a trail for the animals.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the spot here.
There's a Batcher den.
Barely clear.
They're gone.
No.
On Coyote Lake, we drove out to take a look at the mysterious moving rock. These rocks move and leave a trail, and sometimes they don't move every year, but this trail seems to last for years. And the wind moves these when the playa is wet and slick, and they plow a little trail as they move along. And this one's a really big one. It's amazing how it can do that. We'll ride around Coyote Lake a little bit and look it over, and maybe we can get a little bit of that good Coyote Lake dust on ourselves. When we reach camp once again, the sun is creeping down about to where it's getting ready to set over the Steens Mountains, and so it's my job to go down to the beaver pond and put all these blackbirds to roost. Thousands and thousands of red-winged blackbirds fly in, and they hang on the edge of these on the side of a cattail reed to roost at night. And these cattails are out in the water, so if a predator comes wading out to grab one of them, he can hear him sloshing through the water and be up and out of there. The moon is just a tiny little sliver of moon, but what an awesome sight. With the beavers are coming out now and getting ready to do their beaver job. And these beaver don't have a lazy bone in their body. They're busy, busy, busy getting ready for winter. He'll once again go over, swim around a little bit to pick out a really good willow, and then he'll cut it and drag it across the pond again. Time after time, day after day, they repeat this same activity. First there'll be one beaver, and then more beaver will join him. It seems to be a family job. Even the little baby beavers will come out and do their share of the work, and also they have to maintain their beaver dam, and they build it of sticks and mud, and they'll dive down and get some mud and make repairs on the beaver dam about every single day. It almost looks like there's some thought involved in picking out the perfect willow to cut, and these willows just keep coming back just as fast as a beaver can eat them down. And they cruise around the pond almost like he's trying to decide, now which one of those willows do I want to cut tonight? And pretty soon he'll circle back and forth and pick one up, with the blackbirds still coming in from their feeding areas to their roosting areas for the night. He'll pull over. He finally makes up his mind which one he's going to cut. He'll go over to the bank and just stand up, probably with his backside in the water, and he'll chew it down in just a matter of seconds with those powerful large teeth and that powerful strong neck and jaw. Now that willow didn't look just right, so he'll circle back and pick out another one. He moves around and around and around, searching for that perfect willow. And they do use some of the cattails to rebuild their beaver house, and also I think they eat these cattails. They're supposedly very nutritious, and they were called the Indian plant. The Indians used all parts of the cattails. The roots, the stem, and the blossom were all good food. Blossom were all good food. As long as he's cutting down a willow, he just as well take some time figuring out which one he's going to cut. So he'll move in now and maybe cut one if it looks just right to him. Through the cattails and on around he goes. It's just getting harder and harder to make up your mind which one you're going to cut. And that powerful tail is good for signaling, and they'll slap the water with that, and if that doesn't send a chill up your spine, nothing will if you suddenly surprise a beaver. And that not only warns the other beaver, but all the other wildlife in the area, and they can all make good their getaway. It looks like there's the perfect willow, and we can see it wiggling as he chews it off, making huge chips, and it won't take him long. After a very short period of time, the job is done. Now another job is on hand, and that's drag this big old willow back to the beaver house. He looks just like a little tugboat pulling a barge, but he's moving it, and he's not going real fast, but he's moving a rather large willow, and then it'll be sunk right in front of the beaver house. And the process, I don't know how they process it, but they fix it up so it'll keep for winter. These beaver are a real short, stout little animal for their size, and so they can handle this sort of thing with ease. But of course, without the water, it would be much more difficult to move the willows, but they can do it on dry land as well. He drags it across the pond, and the other beaver haven't shown up yet, but they'll be out pretty soon. He drags it across the pond, takes that right turn down till he gets in front of the beaver house, and then we'll see that willow slowly sink down as he pulls it down. And the process begins time after time after time, year after year after year. And so there's some really big beaver in this pond and some very small ones. As the day wears on, we're starting to see more and more beaver come out all the time. I guess the whole family has to work at this job, and besides, you need to get out there and cut some stuff so you'll have something for dinner. The little tugboat is tugging